me what to do. Just tell me what to do with your love. If there's nothing left to see, honey, we can turn around and let it be. Honey, just tell me what to do. Tell me.
Our first storyteller tonight, she's a stay-at-home mom and a writer, and she's going to be telling us a story about how important it is to have friends who can be honest with you. And her name is Katie Blackburn.
The night I went on my very first blind date was back in 2010, and it was set up by my best friend, Emily. And I remember walking into Emily's living room feeling dressed and fancy and ready to go meet this guy that she had been telling me about for months. And I was wearing a black long-sleeve shirt, flared jeans with probably way too much flare, and my white Nike running shoes. Surely the exact same shoes that I had worked out in earlier that day. And Emily, sweet soul sister, matchmaker of a friend that she is, took one look at me and the ensemble I had planned for the evening, and she did this. No. No. Then she marched me back to her room, found something that would help me dress up the black shirt a little bit, demanded I take off the running shoes, and she let the jeans slide. Now, I'll skip to the end and tell you that I ended up marrying this guy that she set me up with, so I'm pretty thankful she made me take off my running shoes that night. I'm so thankful that she told me no. 7 years later, it's 2017, and Alex and I are the parents to 3 precious kiddos, Harper, Cannon, and Jordy. Harper is a 4.5-year-old Spitfire. She's smart and funny and super social. She's like the kind of first child that, one, makes you think that parenting's like really easy and that you're really good at it. And our youngest, Jordy, has just turned 1, and he's so chubby and happy all the time and has the biggest blue eyes that you've ever seen. And Cannon, our middle child, is almost 3. And he still doesn't speak. He might look at you when you're in the room, but he's probably not going to pay much attention. He wears only his adorable red Cars slippers, the ones that look just like Lightning McQueen. He's run away from us a few times, mostly in parks or public places. But once, he ran away and we couldn't find him for nearly 10 minutes. We were just outside on our porch eating dinner, and he was right inside the door, right on the other side of the wall, watching Dora the Explorer. Or at least, that's where we thought he was. But we found out he wasn't inside watching Dora the Explorer. He wasn't anywhere in the house when my husband went inside for more food. And the panic that arrested my heart and my mind in that moment, it still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. We found him just a few blocks away. My husband left the house without even putting shoes on, running down the street in the direction that we were pretty sure he would have gone. And he was there a few blocks away in the arms of a really kind young woman who just assumed that this sweet little boy who couldn't tell her his name or anything about him probably had parents coming to look for him pretty soon. So Cannon has autism, or he is autistic. Chicken or the egg. I will tell you, I've been in this special needs world for nearly 5 years as a parent, and I still don't know. What I do know is that people might have cancer, but they are not cancer. But who knows? Maybe someday Cannon will be able to tell us what he prefers. But in 2017, He's almost 3 years old, and he definitely has some superpowers, like all kids on the spectrum have. And we're definitely not at all worried about his gross motor skills, because let me tell you, he could and did, and often still does, climb everything. And y'all, I really do mean everything. Store shelves, kitchen counters, occasionally vehicles, sometimes the neighbor's fence. It's a good thing they like us. Cannon's autism manifested itself pretty early on in a near impossible ability to be in public totally appropriately, which was kind of cute and funny when he was little, but got less cute and funny the older and stronger that he got. But in 2017, in the initial wake of his diagnosis, as Alex and I were figuring out how to be special needs parents to this precious, unique little boy who we love so much, but was also going to need so much, it was a really hard year. Sometime in the spring, one of Cannon's speech therapists let me know about an early childhood development conference over in Tacoma, and that this conference was going to have a 2-day session on a certain therapy modality that could be beneficial to Cannon in the future. She also said that they were giving away a select number of scholarships to parents who wanted to come, and that would mean 2 nights in a hotel for free and free admission to the conference. And so, not the most romantic date idea we ever had, but we thought, why not? It's 2 nights in a hotel that we don't have to pay for. So in May, my husband and I found ourselves in a big conference hall at a table surrounded by mostly educators, teachers, professionals, therapists, listening to this expert in the field. The presenter, her name was Rosemary. She had been working with kids with autism for more than 20 years, and that meant that she had video after video after video of other teachers and therapists and even parents working on this special mode of therapy with their children. And as much as all of these videos were meant to be helpful and informational and teach us ways that we could connect with our sweet boy in meaningful ways and will his beautiful green eyes to meet ours, I will tell you that as a parent, in that moment, those videos did not feel all that helpful. Because all I could really see were videos of our future. And I didn't want this little 3-year-old of ours to be a 10 or 15 or 25-year-old who still couldn't tell me about his day, or if his stomach hurt, or if somebody was mean to him. Honestly, I wanted to go to this conference and learn what we were supposed to learn and come home and for it to be the breakthrough that we were looking for. I didn't want to go and be reminded that this was going to be a journey we were going to have to grow into for the rest of our lives. So on the second day, my phone lit up with a text message, and it was from my friend Emily, the same friend who had set me up with the guy sitting next to me. And she was just checking in her joyful, happy manner. Katie, how's it going? Are you having fun? How's the hotel room? All those fun things that a friend would say to you when you're on a 2-day getaway. And I responded to her the only way I could, and that was honestly. And I said, Emily, this is so hard. It's so overwhelming. It just feels like so much, and I don't know if I can do it. I know now that what I was really saying to my friend is that I was afraid. I was afraid that Cannon would run away from us again. I was afraid that we would never be invited anywhere, that our family would never be invited anywhere because we were just a bit too much. I was afraid that people would think that I'm a bad mom. And I was certainly afraid that people would think that my son's a bad kid. And when you're living in fear, when that's all you can feel, fear is going to tell you no. It's going to tell you no, you can't do this. But without missing a beat, Emily texts me back, and in all capital letters, she says, yes, you can. And then she followed it up with a line I will never forget. She said, "You are doing an incredible job with a very tough assignment. And I'm going to tell you, yes, you can for the rest of your life." A couple weeks later, my phone lights up again, and it's Emily, and she just has a little message that says, "A little something on your front porch for you." So I open the door, and there on the ground is a brown box with a little Nike swoosh on it. And I open it up to find a new pair of running shoes. And right on the inside of the box, she had written, "Just a reminder that we are committed to running the hard miles of life with you." So here's the thing, y'all. I think when somebody knows you and cares about you and loves you enough to tell you no, you end up really believing them when they tell you yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Our next storyteller is going to be telling us a story about how a stranger had one shot to save his life. So please welcome to the stage Adam Schluter.
What's up, guys? That's a lot of people. You guys are cool. Katie, that was just amazing. My girlfriend's over here just crying. That was just beautiful. So, another round of applause. Just amazing. Love to see vulnerability, and that's something a generation needs right now. So the last few years, I've done a project called Hello from a Stranger, where I go all over the world. I leave my phone at home, and I say hello to strangers. I ask for their photograph, and then I put my camera away and just try to have a genuine conversation with people. And I do this to try to inspire people to put their phones away more often and just connect with one another, interact with the world around you more often. And, you know, suicide rates are the highest they've ever been. We have so much isolation in our culture, and so I'm always trying to just bridge that gap. And I've always been very old-fashioned with technology. And so I was at, it's been in 20 countries now so far, and I think I was at 16 or 17, and I was trying to think of the next country to go to, and Cuba just hit my mind immediately. Has anyone been to Cuba in here? No one's been to Cuba. Go to Cuba. It's just an unbelievable. Yes, there's one. Okay. Cuba is, as you probably heard, trapped in not a bad way though, but stuck in the 50s or 60s, and just life without technology. It's just life with just, you know, primitive cars and primitive technology, and just this minimal awareness of even what's going on in the rest of the world in a very innocent, beautiful way. So if you ever want to remember what life was like before phones and everything, go to Cuba. It's just an amazing place. And when I was going to Cuba, I didn't know that you could, if you could just fly there. I knew you could go to Mexico and fly there. I didn't know how it worked. And you have to give a reason for why you're going to Cuba. And so I reached out to some sponsors, tried to find a company that could sponsor me that had a location in Cuba, and then they could give me their blessing and I could get a ticket there. And I found a company, actually one based out of Coeur d'Alene, Row Adventures, that offered to set me up and allow me to give me their blessing to go there. So when I do these trips, I have zero plans. I usually have an Airbnb for maybe the first 2 or 3 nights, and then I always force myself to need to interact with the community, interact with locals, and have to just hear where to go next. I don't have any kind of agenda or itinerary. And so I flew to Havana, and I had an Airbnb for the first 2 nights in Havana, and my plan was the only thing that Row Adventures asked me to do was to somehow make it to the second largest city in Cuba, which is called Cienfuegos. In Cienfuegos, they have an adventure office there, and they had a guy there named Anders they wanted me to meet. So I was like, oh yeah, okay, great. Well, I won't think anything about it. I flew to Cuba for a month, and normally when I do this in Europe or other countries, there's public transportation, there's obviously, trains or planes or other ways to get around. Well, Cuba is another planet in the best way possible, but there is absolutely no public transportation. There's really very minimal infrastructure outside of Havana. There's just, you are just in such a different moment in history. And so I didn't really know that, but I was really communicating with locals on how to do that. And so I just kind of bounced from city to city as I was moving my way across Cuba. And so I found a way to take some buses. But to give an example of how old school or primitive the bus system is, I was in a town called Veradero, and I then took a bus to Santa Clara, which is in the center of Cuba, and I forgot a camera lens in Veradero. And so I immediately got off the bus. I knew it right away, and I went to the ticket office, and I said, hey, I got to take a bus back to Veradero to get this lens. And they said, well, there's no buses leaving for another 3 days. And so I was like, well, what do I do? And they were like, well, you just got to wait 3 days. What do you mean? And so I was like, okay, so how do I know I'm going to be able to get a ticket when I come back? And the guy's sitting on this desk with a million pieces of paper on it, and he literally tears a corner off of a piece of paper, and he writes my name down on it, and then he puts it with 1,000 other pieces of paper on his desk. And so 3 days later, I go back, so excited. It's an expensive lens, or what? Who cares? But I was just trying to get back to get it. And I go to the same guy. Hey, I got to go to Veradero. And he's like, there's no buses. They're all full. And I was like, hey, man, you wrote my name on that piece of crap little paper. And he's like, oh, hold on. And he just starts sifting through all the papers. And he finds my corner. And I swear to God, he's like, oh, yeah, you're good. Okay, we can get you on the bus. So that's Cuba. Cuba's amazing. And he couldn't spell my name on the ticket, so he had me write it on the computer. He moved out of the way, and I wrote my own ticket. So Cuba's awesome. So long story short, I make it to Cienfuegos. And when I get to Cienfuegos, I wanted to reach out to Anders right away. Very hard to find internet, and I finally did. And in Cuba, you look for people that are sitting around a tree, true story, in a park. And if there's people sitting around a tree, that means there's internet around that tree. And so you go sit around that tree, and you have like 1 bar to be able to find email. Then I got in touch with Anders. And so the other beautiful thing with Cuba is you have 2 options, really. You either stay in hotels, which largely run by the government. All the money goes to the government. And as you know, or might not know, but Cuba is communist and nationalist. And so the people are just largely marginalized. They have no ways of income. They're extremely poor, but they're just such wonderful people. And so the only good thing the government's really done was they allowed the people to do what's called casa particulares. Casa particulares means that any house that would like to can put a blue anchor on the outside of their house, and that means that you can go up to that house with no plans at all, knock on the door, and just ask if you can stay with them. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, and they'll pack up their stuff, and they'll just leave the house with their family, and they'll say, enjoy the house. Sometimes they'll say, we got this little apartment here and next to our house, and just come on in. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, come on in, and they'll be there, and it's just amazing. You get to just live with this family, and for $5, it's $25 anywhere in the country to do this. It's like a standardized rate, and then for $5, they'll cook you any meal. So I would obviously always have them cook me all their meals so I could try their food. And so this morning in Cienfuegos, I had got in touch with Anders, and Anders was like, hey, we're going to pick you up at 11, and I had this whole adventure day planned for us, so like, just be ready. I was like, great. So I woke up and I asked the family. The family was still with me in the house, and so I said, would you guys mind if I had breakfast with you all? And they said, yeah, of course. And so beautiful breakfast, fresh fruit, coffee, bread, butter, simple stuff like that. Eat this great breakfast, and Anders shows up. And it's Anders and his dad, and we get in the car, and we just got in this grand adventure. And the only plan that we had was to make it to a coastal town called Trinidad. And Trinidad is this very old 1500s colonial rum sugar mill town, just incredible. Right on the coast, beautiful place, very difficult to get to and very difficult to get out of. And so they were going to bring me there, we're going to spend that day together, and they were going to leave me there at a Casa Particulares. And so we go out and we just have this whole day. And first thing Anders wanted to do, great Cuban, he wanted to get mojitos. And so we go out on this mountainside, we get some mojitos, we're just having all our fun. And I drink the mojito, and I just feel a little bit strange, but don't think anything of it. You know, I've been probably 2 weeks at this time in Cuba and traveling pretty hard, so not thinking much of it. But I start to kind of feel like I'm gonna throw up. And I tell it to Anders, he's first like, just drink another mojito. And then I was like, well, you know, I really think I'm gonna throw up here. And he's like, how about just, dear God, drink some club soda or something. And so drink some club soda. But there's definitely like something in me, and it just feels weird, but I was okay. I was able to hold it down. And so Anders, I was telling him, hey, I'm not feeling as great. And he's like, no worries. And so he sets up this other adventure stuff for us to do. And I really started feeling sick, just worse and worse and worse. And it's coming on worse and worse and worse. And so we even go out swimming. They have a bunch of beers. We try to jump off these cliffs and go out snorkeling. And I just can't shake how sick I'm feeling. But I hadn't thrown it up at this point. And so Anders finally says, hey, let's go to this beautiful dinner. We set this up in this little local town, absolute, just middle of nowhere. And so we show up at this restaurant, and they bring out this incredible meal. And the second I see the food, I just run out of the restaurant, and I start throwing up in the street. And so I'm just throwing up. Don't have that much in my system. And as I'm throwing up, I finally throw up so much that I pass out. And I don't even remember, obviously, passing out or anything. But the next thing I remember is this grandma had woken me up, and she had brought me a cup of chamomile tea. And when she woke me up, I realized that I'm in the middle of the street, in the middle of nowhere, totally blacked out, and I really have no idea what's going on. And so I go back in the restaurant, and I tell Anders, great host, obviously, sleeping in the street. So I tell him, hey, dude, like, I'm in pretty bad shape. And he's like, okay, we can go. And so I'm still throwing up. And we get in the car, and at this point, I'm throwing up blood. And at this point, it's just worse and worse and worse. And this is just as bad of a situation as you could be in, because remember, there's really no way out of Cuba other than very well planned out, even plane rides and nothing outside of Havana. And so I'm very far, I'm the complete opposite side of the country. And so if you remember, the original plan was to take me to Trinidad and get me this Casa Particulares. And when we got to Trinidad, Anders wanted to get this drink called aguardiente, which is just a very old rum drink. And they were gonna leave me there. And I was just feeling strange. This is actually a little bit before I started throwing up. And they were gonna leave me there. And I said, hey, I'm gonna come back with you. And they're like, no, come on. I'm like, hey, I just don't wanna be left here, and still be in bad shape. So I just kept declining. And now I'm throwing up blood. And now we're trying to make it back to Cienfuegos. And as we're making it back to Cienfuegos, we are stopping at least every 15 minutes, maybe every 10 minutes. And it's a very long car ride back. And so at this point, it's just blood, and it's just a very bad situation. So we ended up making it back to Cienfuegos. And I said, hey, we'll just got to go to the hospital. And they're like, we don't trust the hospitals in Cuba. There's no way we're taking you to a hospital. So it's like, okay, well, what's the plan? He's like, oh, don't worry, dude, you're fine. No worries at all. And I was waiting on him to offer me another mojito, but he didn't. And he took me to a clinic. And he's like, don't worry, dude, they have anti-vomit drugs here. Like, just take one of those, you'll be fine. So we go to the clinic, they give me an anti-vomit drug, and I take the anti-vomit drug, and I throw it up immediately. And he looks at me and he's like, that's pretty bad. So they give me a second one, and I throw up the second one, and we realize then how bad it is. And again, I'm throwing up blood, throwing up everything they're giving me. And so it's nighttime now. It's probably 4 or 5 o'clock at night. And we can't go to the hospitals. We can't get out of Cienfuegos where we're at. I've been throwing up now for probably 12 hours, extremely dehydrated, no end in sight, no way out. And so Anders and his dad finally looked at me and they said, hey, we know this house, we know this place where these 2 doctors live, and we're just gonna take you there as a last hope, and possibly, they're gonna be there. And so we go to the doctor's house, and we knock on the door, and when the doctor opens the door, I'm throwing up blood all over the street. And he opens the door and he sees the blood and he says, bring them inside immediately. And they bring me inside this home, and they wrap me up with a bunch of blankets because I'm just having tremors, I'm shivering so much. And he puts me in a bed and he says, leave him in this bed, wrap him up with as many blankets as possible because we couldn't get me to stop tremoring. And he's like, I will continue to watch him. And so I had found a way, I was very delirious, but I had found a way that I would stop throwing up if I didn't move anything on my body, not even my fingers, not anything. So I laid, there's a clock at the end of the bed, and all I would do is stare at this clock. And every hour or so, Jose would just yell in the window, Adam, how you doing, Adam? And I just would try to respond, and when I would respond, I would get sick. And so we did this till about 10 o'clock at night. And at 10 o'clock, he said, Adam, okay, we got to get you sitting up. You got to just sit up and so we can talk. When I sit up, I start throwing up blood again. And Jose looks at me with a very, very worried face, and he just says, this is very bad. And I said, I know this is very bad. And he runs out the door. And he comes back with Anders. And Anders is my translator, obviously also the adventure guide. And then they run out, and they come back with a guy in cut-off Harley-Davidson, sleeveless T-shirt, big, boisterous guy. And he says, Adam, this is my son. And my son escaped to Paraguay about 12 years ago. And this is the first time coming back to visit us. And he comes back here, he came back here, and it's kind of a Cuban thing that if you're able to escape and are able to make it back to Cuba, that you bring drugs that Cubans can't get for themselves from the government or in hospitals. And so his son introduced himself, and he said, listen, he got all the signs, he went through everything that was going on, and he said, I have this shot, I have this antibiotic that is extremely strong. He said, I brought it for cancer patients, for maybe someone that would not have this in our country. And he said, I only brought one shot, and I brought it to give away to anybody that needed it. And I've been here for 12 days, and I have yet to find anybody that needed this shot. So he's like, somehow I still have this shot. And so he said, I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to mix it with anti-vomit, so that you'll stop vomiting, and antibiotic, and we're just going to see how this goes. And I'm in a dirty Cuban bedroom in just an insane town where not another person on the planet knows me, but I was not about to complain. I was already going to die, so if this is going to take me out, it's still a great story. And so he flips me over, gives me a big steel 5-inch shot in my butt, of course, and pulls it out, and he looks at me and he says, you do not drink anything for the next 2 hours, not even a drop of anything. You just lay there. And those are some of the worst words I've ever heard in my life, because at this point I'd been thrown up for 16 hours. I was just extremely dehydrated. All I wanted was just a drop of water. And so from 10 o'clock to midnight, I just passed out, and I came in and out, and I was blacking out and coming in and out. And I woke up at midnight, and I was able to take my first drink of water without throwing up. And it was just a drop, but it was enough to just start to open my throat up again. And so throughout that night, I had little sips. And then the next morning, Jose said, listen, you're going to stay with me and my wife, and you're going to stay here as long as it takes for us to get you back to life and get color back in you. And my wife's going to cook you everything I ask her to cook you, and we're just going to do what it takes to get you life back. And so, the very beginning, it was water, then it was tea, and then it was fruit juice, and then it was solid fruit, and then it was a little bit of bread. And then over those 3 days, they just nursed me back to life. And the third day I woke up, and I had color back in me for the first time. And Jose woke me up, he looked at me, and he said, you're going to go back to Havana today. We already have a car set up for you. They're going to take you to Havana today, and you're going to get on the first flight you can back to America, and you're going to go immediately back to a hospital to save your life. And spoiler alert, I survived. Here we are, all because of the kindness of strangers. So thank you, guys.
You really had me sold on Cuba in the first half of that story with the affordable housing, and then I really backed out at the death part of the... No, thank you. It's still cheaper than living here. Our next storyteller is going to tell us a story about how she dealt with the pandemic in a position of leadership. She's the president of the NAACP. Please welcome to the stage Keonta Duncan.
Hi, everybody. So, I've never been to Cuba, don't have running shoes, nothing much to see. But I happened to be here in 2020. And 2020, I say it like that, 2020 almost took me out. I'm talking about out. Everything that could go wrong in 2020, it went wrong. I think we might have even had locusts, but I don't remember. But what I remember happening in 2020 was this constant just barrage of negative imagery. People were getting sick. People that I knew were getting sick. People that I saw on television were getting sick. People around the world were getting sick. And in those moments, I felt as if there was nothing that I could do. I didn't have anything else to give. Now, I don't know if this was before the locusts or after, but somehow I had accepted an appointment to be the president of the NAACP. And I don't know if you all remember, but there was this whole George Floyd thing that happened and, this insurrection, there was all these things, right? And so as I am making my way through the year, I am just really overwhelmed with everything that's happening. So the night of December 31st happened. And on December 31st, I was sitting in my living room, in my dining room area, and I had a glass of wine, champagne actually. This was before the locusts. So I had champagne, and I am waiting there like I felt so many people must have been around the world, waiting for the clock to go from 11:58 to 11:59 to midnight, because that would mean that it's a new year and something amazing can happen, and things won't be so sad, people won't be so sick, there won't be so much suffering. And I don't know if you saw the same thing that I saw, but right after 11:59 and then 12 o'clock happened, everything was the same. People were still sick. There was still suffering. There was still pain all around the world, all around our city, the United States. There was still pain, and I didn't know what to do. So I became overwhelmed. Now, I'm a person that has suffered from depression since I was 5. The depression that I felt during that time was depression's depression, whatever that is, however deep that is, before the locusts. And so I am just literally drowning in all that is happening. And I decided that I wanted to give up. Now, I wasn't sure what give up looked like, because I couldn't just get in my car and drive somewhere. I had people dependent on me. I couldn't just not answer my phone. There were people going to be calling, because again, I had accepted this role in leadership with the NAACP. And so I decided that somehow I would just keep going. I would just figure out how to keep going. And then the pandemic hit home. 6 people in my family, 6, the 6 that's after the 5, but before the 7, 6 people passed away in one family. In one family over the course of about 8 days. That took me over the edge, of course. I'm pretty sure the locust was then. But I remember feeling like, how is this possible? How can death hit one family so much? How can it be this much suffering? I was already drowning. I already couldn't breathe, and now this. And the 6th person of the people to pass away was my mother-in-law, Dorothy Jackson. Now I want to tell you guys about Dorothy Jackson. She went to church on Sunday. She went to church probably on Wednesday to Bible study. She went and probably cleaned the church on Saturday. I mean, she was a church-going woman. Everything she said, every sentence ended with, "God bless you." She was that lady. And so when she had gone into the hospital, she initially went in to urgent care. And she wasn't feeling particularly sick, other than feeling lethargic and not having a lot of energy, but no breathing issues, none of the stuff that we were seeing on every channel everywhere in the world. She just was tired. She goes into urgent care. They diagnose her with being COVID positive, but not sick enough to stay in the hospital, so you get to go home. Later that night, she ended up in the hospital, being intubated, and a few days later, she was dead. Now, this didn't make sense to me, because I'm thinking, I just told you this lady said, God bless you to everybody. How could this happen to her? How could the pandemic touch her? Like, why her? And then I realized if I looked at the situation through Dorothy's eyes, her entire life being so committed to her religious beliefs and her faith, she was probably excited to go and meet the God that she wanted to see all of that time. And that is what allowed me to continue to move forward post her death. So now it's the new year. I get through burying, going down to Florida, Gordon Chapel, Florida, this very small town. We take care of the funeral and come back. And now it is the inauguration. Now, I told you right before the locusts had come, I had agreed to be the president of the NAACP. So when the inauguration happened, and then the insurrection happened, and then the George Floyd trial happened, and then the Chauvin trial, just all of the stuff. Riots, protests, no one felt safe. We were, as people of color, particularly afraid during that time. I said, okay, this is really it. No more. No more. No more things. I can't take any more things. And then one day, I looked in the mirror, and this literally happened. I looked in the mirror, and I thought, if I am feeling the weight of the world, imagine what people feel who look to me for leadership. What must they be feeling? And when I thought about what they could be feeling, and I considered how they may be feeling, I knew that I didn't have the opportunity or option to give up. I didn't have any choice but to make it work. There was no other option. When you make a commitment in leadership to lead people with beating hearts and feelings and emotions and experiences, you can't just give up on them, even when it's tough. Even when your own world is closing in on you, even when there is locusts, even when people are dying, even when you cannot rest, you must still lead. You must still lead. And all of us here, we made it. It's 2021. Now the shit is still bad. And there may be locusts right back there, but we made it to here. And we got this. We got this. All of us, every single one of you in the back. We got this. And we will continue to have this because there is no other option. Thank you.
We're going to have a brief intermission so you can grab a drink. Don't plug your meter, it's after 7. I paid a $250 parking ticket like 2 years ago. Somebody's like, don't put money in the... It's Sunday. So brief intermission, we'll be back. Okay, thank you everybody for coming back in. Your next storyteller is about to come up. His name is Josh Armstrong. He's working at the Gonzaga. In the meantime, he's been trying to find a job at Trader Joe's. So please welcome to the stage Josh Armstrong.
My wife Shauna and I were at the urologist's office getting a consult for the snip snip. You see, we were in the middle of a 3-year conversation about whether we were done having children. We, at this point, had 3 amazing boys. But I would come back to her and say, like, I don't know if I have enough room in my heart for a 4th boy. But even more than that was this question that I had, which was, would my life be complete if I didn't get to be the father to a daughter? I just think I knew about, wanting a daddy's girl, and I just didn't know if I could get over that. But here we were in the urologist's office. I thought that we had sort of made this next step, and he's telling us about the procedure. It's kind of final. And I look to my wife, Shauna, and she's just got tears streaming down her face. And I turn to the doctor and say, totally misread this one. We're gonna need a rain check. It was during this season of life that I had just started taking students to Zambia in Southern Africa. We had a study abroad trip, and it was about intercultural leadership, sustainable development. And my main partner in this was a man named Father Dominic Sandu. Oh my gosh, what a generous spirit this man had. Huge toothy grin, and taught me so much about what partnership and friendship looks like. We weren't there to save Zambians. In many ways, he was helping me save myself. And one day we were in the Land Cruiser on these sandy roads, and I turned to him and I said, if there was ever an opportunity to adopt an orphan child, what do you think the community would say about that? I was really concerned about having them think that maybe we'd be taking a child. He said, Josh, no, you would be even more connected to our family. But we really need to find a social worker. So maybe it's a year later and I'm back in Zambia, and in the middle of the night I get this bang on the door, and it's Father Clement. And he said, I've put my truck in the ditch. I need your help. So we drive out there, and under a canopy of more Zambian stars than I could count, we're trying to figure out how do we get his vehicle out with my truck. And, like many times in Zambia, it becomes this comedy of errors as 2 drunk guys from the bar and an old village woman and this woman who I'm sure is a prostitute all show up, each with their own idea. And someone produces this rope, and I'm like, there's no way that that's going to pull that truck out of here. And yet I try, it breaks. About that time, another vehicle shows up, and this man had another stronger rope. And remarkably, we pull the vehicle out, and as I'm driving back to where we stayed, I thought, did it say Ministry of Social Welfare on the side of that vehicle? Francis was a baby-faced social worker who had dedicated his entire life to serving his community. He somehow became quite enamored with my family and invited Shauna and I into his office. As we entered his office, lights out, Zambian praise music, somehow 2 volumes too loud, this calendar, I think it was last year's calendar on the wall, and a cup of Rubio's tea. He told us about the process. In Zambia, you have to stay and foster a child for 3 months, he told us. He told us about the process of identifying orphan children, and we shared with him our desire to find a young girl. At the end of that conversation, he says, I will find you a child. So we returned to Spokane, and months later, I get this WhatsApp or Facebook message from Francis, I must talk to you tonight. And I remember so vividly being in our house, me upstairs, Shauna downstairs, and we take this phone call, and he says, I found a child, and she's older than you were hoping, but I'm so compelled by her story. You have to hear me out about this. And he described this 3.5-year-old girl, said that she was quite shy, which I wondered how that would work in our family. He mentions her name, and I said, could you spell that for me? P-E-G-G-Y. Peggy. I'm thinking Shauna has an Aunt Peggy. And he convinced us, you have to come and get to know her. So Sean and I start making preparations. And the day after Christmas, 2011, we travel all the way to Lusaka. You know, some of those preparations were travel, but many of them were thinking about the complexity of international adoption, of attachment work, of how we could prepare our own hearts for what it would be like to have and receive the gifts from this child. And when we finally traveled 20 hours to Lusaka, the 5 or 6 hours to Solwezi, down from Solwezi along this bush road that was so sandy that you could not stop, with trees on either side, and we get to this very remote village called Kabulumama. And when we get there, walking up to the Faulkner home, I really wanted to be guarding my own heart, right? I was gonna make a wise decision. And we walk into the room, and there's Francis with Peggy in his arms, and it was love at first sight. Here was this girl who, even with no English, she had this wicked sense of humor. She had this full heart, the way that she was playing with the kids. The 3 days we spent there was like magical. Shauna reading to Peggy, us throwing mangoes up into the tree to catch more mangoes. Her, and just, I told Shauna, I think she's like wakes up with a song in her heart. There was a time near the end of our time there that we were walking around the village, and she was on my shoulders, and she fell asleep, and I thought, wow, she feels safe with us. And then we had to do, which was one of the hardest things ever, which was leave her there for the months to prepare to come back, to be there for 3 months. So saying goodbye, coming back, making preparations for our 3 children and us to go return and spend 3 months living in Zambia. So May 2012, we make that epic journey, the 5 of us. We show up, we come down that dusty road again. We pull up to the Faulkner Children's Home, and just the presence of our vehicle, there's children that start coming out. And I'm scanning the crowd looking for her, and I don't see her. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this streak of African fabric in this dress, and this girl sprinting, her hair straightened as only Zambians would think that Americans would want. And she comes running up into my arms, and she says really the only few English words that she knows, the names of her brothers. She proceeds to grab Owen, who's just 11 months older than her, and bring her into the only home that she's ever known. Those next couple of hours were like a blur, but what I do remember were the women who had raised her as we were leaving, singing, "We will never forget, we'll never forget you." We drove a couple hours to the simple home that we had rented for the 3 months in Zambezi, and we started to set it up, and Shauna, as she's known to do, broom, kitchen, just getting us settled, and as I'm known to do, I grab a speaker and put on some music. And I walk into the living room to find the most epic Armstrong dance party, all 4 children, and I thought, this is a family. The next 3 months, we learned so much about Peggy, and we would travel to like little villages, and she would say, "Is this America?" Like, "No, this is Shatokoloki." Is this America? "No, this is Solwezi." But we also thought about like what was a name. Had she come to us with a beautiful African name like Chosomo, I'm sure we would have kept that. But we thought about what's a name that we could give her that would have meaning in the U.S. and Zambia, and we decided on Grace. It's a second chance. It's a gift without any strings attached. It's a blessing. And so Grace Peggy Armstrong came back with us in August of 2012. Maybe a year or 2 later, I'm trying to piece together her initial story, and I looked at the police report. And on that police report, I found a name and a phone number. So the next time I was in Zambia, I called that number just to find out a little bit more about what was her story. And so I find myself traveling to Solwezi, and I'm on the front steps of a woman who tells me about November 2007 when she heard something out in front of her house and she thought maybe it was a cat or something and ignored it, and maybe 45 minutes later she looks out her window to find a newly born child wrapped in shitangi, the African fabric. She calls the police, they bring her to the hospital, and at the hospital, she said, for the next 2 weeks, every day I went and visited her. And I thought about her, and I always wondered what happened to that girl. And she looks me at the eyes, this woman, Miss Zindaba, who just had the presence of somebody's favorite teacher, and she says, you know, I gave her a name. In fact, I gave my firstborn child that same name. And I'm like, wow, what did you name her? And she says, her first name was Grace. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is going to be telling you a story about what it would be like if you had all of your life in one folder. So please welcome to the stage Jennifer Mesa.
Hi, everyone. How are you feeling tonight? Well, I'm really nervous. And I brought my cue cards. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I'm not a storyteller. I'm an urban planner. I can talk about zoning and many other things, but tonight I'm going to share a story with you guys. The first time we packed our suitcases was to immigrate to the United States. My mother heavily guarded this file with her, this file that contained irreplaceable documents. They were just so important to her. She was always nervous about where they were and were they in order. And even at my young age, I knew that that file was sacred. You see, that file contained irreplaceable documents that proved our existence. And without them, we'd be nameless. I was born in Medellin, Colombia, but I left with my family, my brother and my mother, because of the drug-related violence that afflicted our region. My mother courageously migrated to the US with 2 kids, no educational background or English, but she had that courage to believe that we deserved a better life. We left with 3 suitcases, but only arrived with 2. My documents and my suitcase went missing. In Miami, my mamita worked day and night. And when I tell you day and night, it was 24/7. She worked day and night to pay for fees, to pay attorneys, so that she could invest into her papers. She knew that if she invested in her papers, one day my brother and I would have our papers. And that would mean that we can have a normal life. We could work formally. We can one day buy a home. But you see, we immigrated to the land of the free, but we had no freedom. We had no freedom to build roots. I started working when I was 11. After school with my mom, I would clean houses, hotel rooms. I even became a full-time nanny once. I don't know how people trusted me with their newborns at 12, but they did. And all I wanted was to go to school. I felt it, and I also felt really guilty because I wanted more, while others around me just continued working without questioning. But without my complete folder, I was stuck. I couldn't pursue my education. Frustrated and seeking to reconnect with my father in Mexico City, I grabbed my folder and suitcase and went to see him. I'd missed my father, and he had promised to take care of me. He had promised to help me go to college. But family tragedy struck, and the life and education that I was hoping to obtain, well, became impossible. And at the same time, I unknowingly violated the terms of my papers in the US. And then I faced a 10-year penalty, not being able to return home to my family. Life continued. I worked. And I also raised a son in Mexico City as a single mother. For a decade, I told my son about the US. I'd share stories about Colombia, our family, pumpkin pie, and how one day we would be able to return and be with our family here. It was awful to relive my experiences through him because we couldn't grow roots. We couldn't have nice things because we were in this constant limbo, waiting to start our life, waiting for those papers, waiting for a sign. But then one morning, I received a call from my mom, screaming, Jenny, ya llegó tu día. Your day's here, your visa's here, your appointment's here. I couldn't believe it. Finally, I had waited 10 years for this day to go to the US Embassy, to have my appointment. We packed up our bags, we grabbed our folder, and we went straight to the US Embassy in Bogota. And I traveled with my folder, and I held it as tight as my mother did when she left for Colombia. The morning of my visa appointment, I was ready. And when I mean I was ready, my little boy and we were clean. My hair was straightened. I wore a blazer to appear, professional and trustworthy. And I was so nervous. I got to, as nervous as I am tonight almost. We got to the US Embassy in Bogota. And we got in this line with so many other people like us, with their folders in their hands, and in their other hand, their hearts, just waiting. In line, the moments felt like hours. And I was so nervous. I could hear other people's cases, other people being interviewed. Some of them were happy because they had gotten their papers approved and they were going to be reunited with their families. And others were crying because they had their opportunity taken away. My name got called, and I went in to this small booth, bulletproof window, and through the window I could see the consul. She asked me a few questions, and I was ready, I was prepared. Took a deep breath. She asked to see a few documents, and I showed them. And then she simply said, "You and your son are approved. That's it." And I went, "That's it?" That took like 2 minutes. I brought more things. Don't you want to see my documents? I brought pictures. I got more things. Here's my filing cabinet. And she just coldly said, "No, next in line." I couldn't believe it. It was as if all my prayers had been answered. I can't even tell you how I made it home from the embassy, to my house. I truly believe we just floated home because all of this weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It was surreal. I was so happy. But then 2 days later, while celebrating with my family, I got a call from the US Embassy saying that there was a mistake and that my visa had been approved, but my son's hadn't because he was born in Mexico. So he was gonna have to start a whole new process, and that could take 8 to 15 years. I was devastated. I was truly devastated. And all I could think was, who's this person to determine whether me and my son could be together? Why should his nationality determine his opportunities in life? How could they be so heartless to offer me an opportunity but not my son? The next day I went to the embassy and I did not wait in line. I don't know how I made it through, but I made it through guards, I made it through the line, I made it through everybody, and I begged to please speak to a consul because there had to be some sort of error. And they said, "Well, you see, you are gonna need to prove that he's Colombian. And I'm gonna need proof of his Colombian birth certificate." And I looked at her and I went, "My God." But you see, I didn't tell you guys that my folder was like a Mary Poppins bag. I already had that. I had already registered registered him when he was born. He was also Colombian and Mexican. And I get the folder out, I get the file out, and I said, "Here, I told you, I had more documents for you to look at. Come on." I give her the file, and she just glances at it and says, "Oh, well, it's not certified. in Colombia. It needs to be certified by a Colombian government here. And I said, okay. And I ran around Bogota, a city that's not mine, but I love Bogota. And I asked everybody on every corner where to certify this document. 24 hours later, we show up to the same embassy, same line, with all the same fears, worries. What am I gonna do? I'm sweating. And then I'm waiting in line and my son stops me and he says, Mommy, what happens if they say no? What's gonna happen? Are you gonna go? What's gonna happen with me? And I stopped and all my visa worries just went away. And I looked at him and I kneeled down and I said, Papi, I'm your mom and nothing is ever gonna take that away. I'm with you. No matter what happens, either we go back home and start a new dream. We could start building a new dream together, but I'm with you. Fast forward, 6 years later, we immigrated to Spokane. I started working again, but this time I started working towards my education. I got my GED, I went in to get my AA, I had a beautiful baby girl. I advanced in my bachelor's, and then I started preparing for graduate school, because I was aiming high, just like my mama did. And at the same time, the 45th had just gotten elected. Racist rhetoric was everywhere, and anti-immigrant sentiment was on the rise. Border Patrol was in our community. And I was wrapped up in a dangerous domestic violence cycle that I couldn't get out of. And it was endangering me and my son. But I wasn't gonna let that stop me. I got here. I got all the way here. So I applied to PhD programs to pursue my doctorate. And I also applied to programs that would be in the East Coast where my family is. You see, I made it all the way here to the US, but I was still a country away from them and I needed to be home. I needed to be with them. And I also started applying for my citizen application because I was gonna take action. And shortly after, I received acceptance and full ride scholarships into some of the most prestigious universities in the US. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I could make it, that I would be accepted, and that I would actually have the choice and the liberty to decide where I'll go. I had everything planned. I had a job. I had housing for my kids. I had everything. I had a parenting plan for my daughter. And then one day, I got a notice from the courts that my daughter's parenting plan was not going to be honored. Instead of discussing my parenting abilities in the courts, I was fighting for my dignity in the courts. You see, I was being accused of being a danger because I'm Colombian. I was being accused of being connected to the drug cartel and to criminals in Mexico and in Colombia. I drive a Toyota 2006 Camry, no. In grad school. That I was unfit to be a parent because of my immigration background. And that my activism was politicizing my children and endangering them. That I was racist towards white people. And that I was an immigrant that was abusing public resources None of that was true. They had no proof besides the fact that I was an immigrant. But in the Trump era, that shit worked. Instead of discussing me as a parent, my stability, and what I provided for my kids, I was on the stand for 5 days discussing my father, who had passed away 18 years ago, details about his life. Instead of discussing how I feed and provide for my children, I had to give details of how I immigrated here, how I made it to the US. Instead of discussing, their involvement in school, I had to discuss why and how my aunt had a pool, because apparently only rich people have pool and drug cartels. All those familiar feelings came up again, that uncertainty, that losing everything, and even worse, just having my immigration jeopardized, what would I do? I've been working my entire life for this. And those same feelings and questions came over me that I had asked about my son 6 years ago. You know, why should my nationality determine my future outcome? Why is it that I'm seen as an unfit person because I'm a Colombian immigrant? Does that make me less? Does that make me less of a mother? And it was very difficult. It almost broke my heart. But being an immigrant doesn't make you less. I left that court diminished. I felt so little. And here I was in the community telling everybody to stand up for discrimination, stand up for yourself, know your rights. But I couldn't even stand up for myself. I made it home, and my son took one look at me, and he said, "Mommy, those lies are nothing. I'm your son. We are your children. And nothing is ever going to take that away. No matter what happens. We're your kids. Either we both all go together, or we don't go, or we stay home and start building a new life. I'm with you." Thank you. My son is over there, just graduated high school. Say hi, Pojo.
We have one last storyteller tonight. He's been our DJ this entire time. So he's a DJ, he's also a filmmaker. Please welcome to the stage, Darian Mack.
Well, if you don't mind, I think I'll be and not together means everything to me.
About 3 weeks after my mother's funeral, I gathered all the information and completely accepted the fact that I will never hear her voice again. I was too late. A lot of people have phones now, it's pretty regular, but I never once thought to sit her down and just say, "Hey, can you just talk to this camera just in case you pass so I could have it until I do?" And I never got that. My family is a very photocentric and musically centered group of people. My grandmother, who was always at every single family function suggesting, almost demanding that we take photos together, has always instilled, the idea of cherishing these moments and having them for yourself in case anything happens. Through the process of my mother going away, I've channeled all that energy that I would use to care for her and directed it towards my grandmother, since she's the only existing mother that I have left. Everyone else is gone. And so while she's still here, living in Spokane about 10 minutes that way, I'm still able to be a presence in her life and still, accept all of her stubbornness and all of her wisdom as something positive. So the only thing about that is that she is currently in the process of selling my childhood home that I lived in for 18 years, and she's moving back to Louisiana because, as I said before, I'm the only I'm really the only one left up here. Everyone else is down south, people that I haven't even met. And it's like she needs to be around a very large support system that's larger than me. So she's going back down, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And so to support her, I've been helping her, take stuff, sell a bunch of records, pick the heaviest couch that is also a futon / hide-a-bed. It was so awful. It was so bad picking that thing up from downstairs, bringing it upstairs through the narrowest hallways, outside, through the back door, around the house. Just so much extra stuff. And we're at a place now where most of the house is empty, and it's the first time I've ever seen the house that empty. And now, when I first was going to tell a story, and I met with Eric about, deciding what type of story to share, I was going to stick with a story about her. But in between our two meetings, determining what type of story to tell, Martha, who is my grandmother's friend who was assisting, take stuff out of the house and, help her move or whatever, she asked me, hey, your grandmother needs help in a very specific way. I need you to go inside of her bedroom and reach deep into her closet that she can't walk into because it's lifted. So I need you to reach in there and grab stuff that's out the back, stuff that's been in there for decades, right? Just go back there and pull some stuff out so she could get it, organize it, and figure out what to do. I, of course, do it, and I pull some stuff out, and I find some tapes, right? I find some tapes, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. Probably a kid video of me doing some weird dance or whatever. Let's just go ahead and watch it. And so I tell her that, hey, I'm going to take this footage back, and I'm going to check over it and see what's going on. I take it home, and I'm watching it, but I had to take the VHS-C tape, right? This isn't a VHS, a regular one. It's like a miniature one. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you definitely don't. Definitely have no idea what I'm talking about. So I take the VHS-C tape. I put it in a VHS adapter so I could put it inside of a regular VCR, right? The age range is beautiful in here. So I take that, put it into VCR, but I want to get this into a file, whatever's on it, right? I just want to put it into a file so I have all these cords, and I could basically put anything into a HDMI. So I take the RCA, I put an adapter in it and twist it around and do a push-up, and then I plug it into my computer, and I start recording on OBS, which is don't worry about it. So I have OBS running, and I'm looking at these tapes. I got a few, and I think back to other tapes that I found in the past. A tape of me in theater back in elementary school where I'm like, I think I'm a king, an Egyptian king, and my mother was recording, and it was a really short video, but I was like, okay, that's cool. It's probably another one of these. And I put the tape in, and it's like a barbecue. Right, it's just a bunch of black people at a park, probably Chief Gary or something, just having a good old time. We're dancing. There's like what's that called? Soul Train, where they got the people on the side, and you got kids in the middle doing like weird dances. Adults like saying, hey, get out there and show us what you got. Do that little dance you be doing or whatever. And just adults just motivating children to just get out there and just do something. So I see like old people that I remember, like my cousin Temple, she's dancing terribly, and some other people get in there, and I look towards the back and I see this little chubby kid, and he's sitting in a chair, and he's kind of just chilling, and I see this woman come out of nowhere and kind of like urge him to dance. She's like, okay, we're here, you're with your family, we all love you, we're not gonna judge you too harshly. Get out there and do something. And he kind of gets up, and then he backs up and sits back down. And after I got done being distracted by him, I look closer and I see this woman that I haven't seen in so long. And at this point, I'm not even thinking about, is this footage gonna have her, right? I completely accepted the fact that she was gone forever. I grieved, I got through it, and then I find this footage, and I'm like, and then the tape cuts, right? It cuts, and I'm just in a room in my apartment, just silent, freaking out, and I don't know how I did both of those at the same time, but it's all internal. It's all this just rushing, and I got 3 cats, and they're dead silent, which never happens. They sense the sense of urgency, and just I've never felt this way, and so I take the tape and I rewind it, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm looking for a black woman, maybe 5'4". She's bald at this time. She has gigantic gold hoops in her ears, gold rings on every finger, just like a white t-shirt, black and greenish overalls. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that throughout the rest of the tape, and it's only 2 minutes. So I'm looking at the tape again. I'm going through it. Everything else means nothing. I'm looking for that one thing. I'm laser focused on any frame where she's in it. And I'm looking for 2 things. I need to see her face moving, because I've never seen that in a decade, right? We have all these photos, but it's like I need movement. I need to see her moving. So I need to see her face, and I need to hear her voice, which I thought were completely gone. And so I'm looking at this footage, and I see her. I pause it, and I can't see her face. It's just this. It's just... And I swear it's like a movie. Every time that she would be in the frame, I'm over here trying to move around inside this little television, trying to get an angle of her, but the reality doesn't work like that. So I'm trying to see her, and I got nothing. I can't hear her. It's a loud barbecue. There's kids yelling and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm just trying to figure out, okay, well, what do I do right now, right? The tape ended. It's just static. I'm looking through 20 minutes of static, just hoping. It's like you never know. There could have been something maybe later on, so I keep watching, just static, fast forwarding a little bit, just waiting for something, waiting for what I wanted, what I've waited so long to see. And there's nothing on that tape. But the thing is that I found another. There was the blank tape that I just showed you, that I just told you about. But there's also a tape that said July 4th, 1999. I know that there's no other tapes in existence. There's nothing else. It's this last tape that could have anything that I have been looking for. I put it in frantically, press play, and there's static. But I'm an idiot because I didn't rewind the damn thing, so. So after about, 6 seconds, I'm like, well, bullshit. No, I'm rewinding this. I rewind it, go to the top. I kept rewinding. It's such a long tape. I think it's like what those maybe hold, maybe 25 minutes. This thing was going for so long. It finally stops. I press play, and it has so many people in my childhood home, in the kitchen, laughing, dancing. There's kids, there's adults, there's people who I haven't seen in years, people who passed, Uncle Billy. I've totally forgot about him, but I see him and he's dancing pretty well. My Aunt Kareem, Chauncey's mom, Jackie's in the video. Like, there's so many, like, that was a time when everybody appeared to be so happy, and the house was filled with so many people, and now the house is bare. And I'm looking, and I immediately see my mom. I see her face. This was back when she was healthy, and she was bigger, which was fantastic. she's dancing with my friend's mom and laughing. I hear her voice again, and it's like I almost didn't recognize it. I was like, well, that's my mom? Oh, okay, well, I'll go with it. It'll work. She's giggling, and it's all there. It's all what I finally found after so long. It's like I never thought that it would come, but it was there, and I'm watching the tape and keep going, and she reaches out the door and she yells for someone and pulls this bald, big-eared kid out the door, and it's me holding a red shirt, and I'm just getting yanked. She's like, yeah, you're gonna dance with me right now. Like, that's what's gonna happen. And knowing myself at that age, I was the shyest person ever, still I am. But I vanish. I vanish into the crowd, and I'm like, I don't want to be in front of people and do something to put myself in jeopardy or whatever. So I vanish, and I could hear her say, "Oh, he doesn't want to dance. If you give him some money, oh, he'll dance. Oh, he'll dance, all right." I am not a stripper. Not anymore. So I'm still watching it, right? And I don't know if this video is going to be 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 20. I have no idea how long this is going to be, right? So every frame, every second was just so impactful for me, just watching my grandfather just sing so bad and seeing him dance with my grandmother, who they're both alive, but they're divorced, but just seeing them at a time where they were just so happy. And they basically raised me, and just seeing them just interacting in a way that I haven't seen in so long, and it's just so good. And now I have that as a file on my phone. I can watch it at any point, and it feels so good to just finally have that. So I don't necessarily know how to end this, but all I know is that some of us are probably in a similar situation before finding footage, but this was before we all had iPhones all the time. I didn't get my iPhone until maybe 2013. I had an NV3. I'm not gonna take a video of my mother on that piece of junk. And so now it's like we have that option to just capture something, right? Capture it, keep it, even though most of the stuff we capture is just crap and it's blurry and messy, but just hold on to one thing. Just have it for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. If you enjoyed this, sign up with your email, follow online, follow on Instagram. If you didn't, don't tell anyone about it. Tell all your friends. Thank you to all our storytellers tonight. Thank you all for coming out.
For the ones who wish it on me, hold these niggas perish. We was flying over London, wasn't interference, but I could see it all. I saw my vision clearing. You can't compare. I feel the whisper hit my ear when I be in the errands. Took my sister cause she missed the hearing. I swear I miss my parents. We was ready for the war if you click the clearance. Since I was in the carriage, holding in this crown like when you feel embarrassed. And instead of caring, I was heavy staring, hoping not to feel despair. Hungry when I feel the air, never sitting on the thought because my mission shared. If the last one didn't work, we tried different prayer,